Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to review this video on stormwater management. I'm Joe Marr. I am here with Cheryl McCluskey. We co-chair the Stormwater Committee, which is made up of about 12 volunteers total. Cheryl has put together a very good presentation. It takes about 20 minutes that'll walk us through a lot of information on stormwater management. I'm just going to hit a couple of quick points at the beginning and then network it right over to Cheryl. So first of all, a quick distinction between what are wetlands and what are stormwater management facilities. Wetlands are the areas in the community that, among other things, you'll see a green and white sign planted in them saying conservation area, no disturbance permitted. Wetlands are regulated totally by the Army Corps of Engineers. There is no type of seasonal maintenance done on wetlands. Stormwater facilities, and there are 24 of them in Meadow Glen, they're a different animal. They're there to capture excess stormwater in a heavy storm. They do require seasonal maintenance. Cheryl will get into some of the details on that. But that's the basic difference between the two. So a question that comes up a lot is, whose idea was it to put these stormwater facilities in the first place? The answer to that is they were required by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and the Conservation District. They were not the idea of anybody in the community. They weren't the HOA's idea. They certainly were not something Toll wanted to do because Toll had to pay to put them in. And even Skipback Township was not really involved in this. This is a state mandated regulation. That's why these facilities are here. A couple reasons we put this presentation together. One, just to share some good information on what these facilities are, how they work, why they're here. But also there's a significant cost impact to the community in 2022. If you look back 12 months ago, there was a budget of $26,000 in our community's budget for stormwater maintenance. Now, 2022, that number has increased up to $77,000. That's a $51,000 increase. So why? Why such a big jump? The short answer is contractually, as Toll completed construction in the community, the responsibility for maintaining seasonal maintenance on these facilities passed from Toll over to the community. That actually happened during the 2021 year, but in 2022, we will be responsible for swallowing the full cost to maintain all these basins. So we're all aware that there's a $30 a month dues increase in our monthly HOA dues. If you take the $51,000 increase just for stormwater and factor it into that dues increase, it represents half of it. $15 a month is going just to stormwater to make sure these facilities are maintained. Why spend so much on maintaining them? If we don't maintain them and they stop working, we're required to repair them. That's a six-figure expense to do it. So just like maintaining your car, changing the oil, changing the brakes every once in a while, it's better to do the maintenance piece than wait until we get a huge bill to fix one, which would probably require an assessment. Last comment I'll make, Cheryl McCluskey, we're lucky to have her on this committee and in this community. Cheryl has spent a lot of her own time and effort on stormwater management issues. You'll see on the PowerPoint here, she's a Montgomery County watershed steward. What that means is she has already put in a minimum of 50 hours of coursework and much more than the required 50-hour minimum of field work on stormwater issues. She knows this topic. She's good at it. She's a great asset to our community on the topic of stormwater. So with that said, Cheryl, take it away.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. And maybe a short disclaimer. I come from 35, 38 years of tech and real estate. I was not an environmental science major. Maybe that's why I'm so intrigued by all this right now. But I know a little and I'm happy to share it. And the timing is perfect with retirement and me being able to focus on this now. So here we go. So the title is How Meadow Glen Takes Ownership of Our Stormwater Management Areas and Avoids pretty much just getting in any type of trouble. The original first 8 minutes of this presentation are actually a modification of the presentation done by Krista Brown, who is a compliance specialist with the Department of Environmental Protection. And they're really the stewards of how these watersheds areas get managed as respects stormwater. So here we go. Everyone is pretty familiar with stormwater in general. The term, it's precipitation that falls to the earth in any form: rain, snow, sleet, or hail. It goes into something you might have seen in elementary school, this water cycle. As it comes down that mountain in the background, you can see the precipitation running off the surface of the mountain. In a perfect world, it hits this natural area, and 50% of the water that runs down into a watershed actually will infiltrate into the ground, which is great because that fills our aquifers with purified water as it infiltrates. It also then continues around the cycle. It evaporates, condensates, there's transpiration from trees and plants, and the cycle starts over again. So here's a healthy Pennsylvania stream. That same mountain is in the background. Trees and shrubs and plants are slowing that water down as it comes down the hillside. And as it approaches the either side of this beautiful stream, each side is referred to as a riparian buffer. And that's basically holding the roots are holding the soil in place. And as that water comes down the hill, it is slowed down. Some of the volumes going into the earth, and some of it, when it makes it into the stream, is clearer and cleaner than when it first came down the hill. Someone told me once the riparian buffers are like body pillows on either side of a stream. So infiltration, you'll hear me say this a lot, where each layer is acting as a filter, blocking the particulate matter and allowing fresh water to return to the aquifers below. So quick moment here between the definition of impervious and pervious. When I do this presentation for kids, I basically hold up a piece of ceramic tile to indicate impervious surface where it runs off, or a sponge where I hold up a sponge and say everything is going to get soaked into the ground, as in the picture on the right, where it's soaking into the ground and the aquifer below. And then we have the urban water cycle. In Skip-Pack, we're actually considered urban, at least rated urban, even though we're not like this diagram I'm showing you here. Condensation still comes down, but a lot more is running off into our streams. It's still evaporating, it's still transpiring with plants, but much less is entering the ground below because what's there? A lot of pavement. Parking lots, etc. So it runs quickly into the streams, and we only have about 15% of the water falling in an urban water cycle making it into the aquifer below. And how does it get there? Well, we're real familiar. Even in our Meadow Glen area, we have lots of grates, we have pipes, roads, everything is forming a conduit to get that takes the water away from where it normally would have fallen into the earth and the dirt and puts it someplace else. So what's the big deal? It still makes it to the streams. Does it matter how it gets there? And it does. As it's rushing across these parking lots or roads and various conduits, it's bringing things with it. You can see trash in this photo, but if you look carefully, you can also see oil and gasoline that's causing a problem for the cleanliness of the water. In our area, our most common pollutant is actually sediment. In this case, the developer hasn't put in any of those compost tubes to slow down the sediment as it's running off the surface of the area. Another problem in our area is the fertilizer that is the farmer both purchased to put on their fields, as well as the natural fertilizer that cows are bringing to the equation. That puts way too many nutrients into the stream and causes a different set of problems in terms of the quality of the water that ultimately is rushing across the surface. because it's all being rerouted, we have increased speed and volume. And when you have increased speed and volume, you have this Skippack Creek photo here, where the area behind the young man is significantly eroded. The speed of that water is hitting that. And in fact, if you were the landowner of the property behind him, you're losing acreage. And that sediment is also headed into the stream and clouding the water for a lot of the keystone species living at the bottom of that stream. Here's more sediment water, and this is what wood chips do in a stormwater area. They'll float right to the top and create a problem for anything that was going to drain here. From a road standpoint, a lot of the conduits, those ones in the previous photographs, are made of metal, and over time they can break down. They can't handle the volume of the water, and as they break down, they create real erosion issues. This is in Pottstown, Montgomery County. So a long time ago, 1948, in fact, the fishermen, the trout fishermen, were the first to notice a problem when they implemented the Pennsylvania Clean Streams Act. That was followed by a more significant federal law called the Clean Water Act of 1972. That also stipulated a national pollutant discharge elimination system. Some of you may have heard of the term NIPD's permit, and that is going to control the amount, the TMDL, the total max daily limit, that any individual, organization, or group can put into the water before it makes its way to the watershed or the stormwater areas. NIPD's permit is a term that if you've been in pharma or you've been in industry, you may have heard of it before. Dropping down to the variety of NIPD's permits that can be pulled, there's one that Toll had to do is the erosion and sedimentation control. And that's why we have all those compost tubes that are around our area, slowing the sediment and trying to prevent that sediment from getting into our streams. So in summary, I felt as though stormwater was identified as needing management just the same way we discovered in the 1500s that you can't put chamber pots out the window. You end up with sewage problems that cause health issues. Same way with industry. You have Love Canal in 1972. This isn't good to have streams on fire, rivers on fire. So we need to control what industry did to the water. So pretty much in 2003, and definitely in the last 10 to 15 years, we've really put teeth, the townships and the organizations, the EPA has put teeth into this by recognizing stormwater as another output that needed strict controls. So here we are. This is actually something I took off the EPA's website. Is actually I can't gesture on the screen, but at around 10 o'clock on this page, you'll see Letterek Golf Club. So the streams around Letterek Golf Club, and to the left of that is us. It's at the intersection of Cross Road and Skippack Pike. Those red streams are probably due to sedimentation. In Pennsylvania, you have other pollutants like fertilizer, overnutrients, and acid mine. But for us in our local area, the biggest problem is sediment. So the thing you want to remember about stormwater at Meadow Glen is the intent of the law and the rules that we have to follow as stewards of our acreage is that any water that fell on Meadow Glen really needs to stay in Meadow Glen. We're not supposed to reroute it outside of Meadow Glen. So 100 years ago, if a raindrop fell, it should fall, before our development was here, it should fall into the earth the same way and infiltrate down below just as it did before. So here we are, Meadow Glen. We are 273 homes, almost 120 acres, a thing I didn't know before looking into this. 52 acres of open space, or almost 44% open space. And in that area, in that 120 acres, we have 7 big basins. I'm going to just make it simple and call them big basins and little basins or small basins. But the 16 additional areas we need to take care of are stormwater management facilities or stormwater quality areas, heretofore known as big basins and small basins. We also have one wetland mitigation area. So the great news is Meadow Glen is covered with green, trees, grass, all this good stuff. And we are not lots of pavement, lots of roofs, lots of impervious surface. So that's the great news. Specifically, here we are. I started with phase 2 because that's where the numbering starts. If it probably is everyone familiar with this, if you pull in from Crossroad, one of the biggest basins is on the left-hand side, basin 1. If you continue down Spencer Drive toward the back, the second big stormwater basin is basin 2. And there are 5 additional stormwater quality or stormwater management areas or little basins. If we cut across Crossroad into phase 1, basin 3 is the large one down on your left, and there are 3 additional areas, 6, 7, and 8 on your right. And here's where I take a moment to discuss something that helps clarify some of the differences between all the smaller stormwater management areas or little basins. People have asked us, gee, why do the stormwater areas look in phase 1 and 2 look so radically different than almost anything in phase 3? And the reason is that the residents in phase 1 and 2 signed on the dotted line for their homes before most of those stormwater management, smaller stormwater management areas were completed. So they recognized then that, hey, all the water falling on Meadow Glen is not staying in Meadow Glen. Given our heavy clay-based soil, a lot of that water is running off, and that's not going to work. So the engineers designed, toll paid, and residents had some input. And in those, what is now, I guess, 5, 8 stormwater areas, the smaller ones, there are very specific plants in there, and they're about 7 years old. The difference with anything you see in phase 3 is those basins and stormwater areas were there when the residents signed on the dotted line. So there were no unknowns or fewer unknowns. So the stormwater areas were already signed, sealed, and delivered, defined, and blueprinted after we purchased our homes. Excuse me, before we purchased our homes. The other difference is in phase 3, the stormwater management areas had really never been tended to until this summer. And the 3 largest basins, 4 largest basins, which I'll cover in detail in a second with a photo, they were not even stormwater basins until this most recent August. So they looked and acted differently. They had different function. Another unrelated item of note is that you'll hear the terms Blue Tree and Chiron Environmental. Blue Tree are the people, they're the vendor that we've hired to cut and clip our shrubs, cut our grasses and clip our shrubs. Think of it as landscaping. Versus Chiron Environmental, whose primary function is they have a high degree of expertise, and their function is to help us manage these stormwater areas. The other, again, unrelated but notable point is these stormwater quality areas, stormwater management areas, their sole purpose in life is to manage the speed, the volume, and the quality of the stormwater. Speed of stormwater, volume of stormwater, and the quality of the stormwater. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So on to phase 3, which again looks different. If you come in from Route 73, Skipback Pike, you'll notice 2 large stormwater basins on the right and left, and one in front of you when you come to the end of Woods Drive. That's basin A. So you have A, B, and C pretty much around you as you drive in from Skipback Pike. Storm Basin C is up in the right-hand corner of this screen, but is basically the one next to the clubhouse. So there's 4 big areas that weren't created until this past August. There are an additional 8 stormwater management areas in phase 3. Oh, a note here, this is what Joe was referring to in the beginning of the presentation, where we are not talking about the areas behind these green and white signs. We're talking about the clearly defined stormwater management areas. Behind this sign is managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and we're not allowed to manage those at all. So back to my point earlier about the stormwater basins created in the summer and fall of this year. Let me go ahead to the picture because it works better in terms of explaining it. In August, these were, prior to this point, they were sediment basins. So toll was required as part of that NIPDES permit in the beginning of the process when they began to disturb the earth and put our homes in. They were required to pull a permit that said, you need to catch any sediment that is rolling off Meadow Glen property. We don't want it going into the streams, and it should be caught in these basins. And it was. So there were truckloads and truckloads of sediment removed from these basins, carted off site and disposed of this summer. In its place were they put, they recognized a problem similar to what happened in phase 1 and 2. This clay-based soil is not doing a great job of allowing the water to infiltrate. And these new basins, all the basins, in fact, the big ones, they need to drain in 72 hours. Otherwise, they're really not doing their job of allowing the water to infiltrate. So you can see the red shale in this photograph. Toll had to pay Chiron Environmental to dig down another 32 inches and do new pipe work and drain work into those large cement boxes, pull all that red shale they jackhammered out, take it off site, put in new laterals that connect to a new 32-inch lower point in those concrete boxes, string the laterals together, and then fill it with the special soil. You can see the black soil in the photograph and brown soil behind it, 2 different types of soil that allow the water to infiltrate into these basins. On top of that soil was a very special seed mix called the Pennsylvania Facultative Wetland Seed Mix from the Ernst Seed Company, designed for our specific longitude and latitude, containing native grasses and plants specific to our area. On top of those seeds was this grass mix. The straw was like a goose netting, which you sometimes trip on if you walk around these things. There's goose netting holding the straw and the seed in place. So they're pretty sophisticated, as Joe mentioned at the beginning. If one of those things should fail, Toll is on the hook to make sure these things drain in 72 hours for the first 18 months. After that, we're going to make sure they're working, because after that, it becomes our responsibility, and it's a big deal to get them re-engineered and redone. Remember, all that soil needs to get taken off site. So we want them to work, which is why we're spending the time going over this detail. So this next slide is really just explaining some of the differences across the basins. On the left-hand side is a really complex, happens to be the wetland plan, but it also looks like some of the stormwater basin blueprints in phase 1 and 2. Very detailed, showing you there are, let's say, 15 swamp oaks or 32 red twig dogwoods, 14 liriope, and 86 black-eyed Susans. So specific trees, shrubs, and plants that are growing in those particular areas. Contrasted with the black and white photo on the right with the yellow highlighting, that's just a very basic basin design. You're pretty much putting dirt down, putting a specific seed down on the bottom of the basin, that Pennsylvania Facultative Wetland mix containing the native grasses. And then on the sides of that basin is yet another seed mix. It's called the Pennsylvania Piedmont Province Riparian Buffer Seed Mix from Ernst Seed Company, as a specific number. And that's where the plants that were growing in that second or third slide I showed you, those native plants are acting like buffers for that stream in the center. So the other good news with those types of plants is they're pollinators and food for all our local wildlife. Finishing up with that picture in the middle is kind of a hybrid of both of those designs. So you have very complex on the left to very straightforward on the right. But there is a blueprint, and we can't decide that, gee, we want our own plants in there. These are specific plants. And here they are, or this is just a generalization of them. The point, if you don't remember anything from this presentation, remember this slide, specifically this, which is a representation of the deep-rooted native plants and grasses and how they're going to hold that soil in place. Contrasted with what actually is in there right now, which is an annual ryegrass or an annual turf grass, just to hold the soil in place because they did the basin so late in the season. But the perfect picture is these plants, roots are holding everything in place and allowing the water to infiltrate into the bottom of the basin and out to our streams after it's been cleaned. So here's some of the actual plants that are supposed to be growing in the bottom of our basins. On the left-hand side, you can see actually all the pictures are of these clumping native grasses. Here's one of our basins. It's looking pretty good. In the foreground, you can see the clumping native grasses have taken place. in the back left, tough to see, but our goldenrod, which is one of the native plants growing on the side. In the foreground on the right are some native asters. So it's feeding the wildlife, but more importantly to our immediate goal is that it's allowing, those deep roots are allowing the water to infiltrate down. And by the time it makes it out of the basin, it's clean. The downside of this particular basin, I'll just point out, is you'll see on the right-hand corner at about 2 o'clock, some detritus, some cuttings that have been left in the basin. That's not great, because what happens is plants can't grow under that. So you have basically bare dirt, and bare dirt is like a death knell to stormwater. As that dirt enters our streams and waterways, it clogs the most keystone species at the bottom, the mussels, the trout, and it begins not to function after that. The stream begins not to function. Here's another good example of a healthy basin, lots of tall clumping grasses. There are a couple bare spots in the same spot on the picture on the right-hand side. We're looking for 95% plant coverage in the bottom of those basins. And that fact actually is in our rules and regulations regarding the maintenance of these stormwater basins. The next picture is what we cannot do. In this one, the grass has been cut really short, and there's no grass north of the Mason-Dixon line that can be cut as short as this with any regularity. It just won't grow. So in its place, we'll get invasive species, and they will clog and take over all the native species, and they don't have that same healthy root structure. So in summary, federal and state law requires that our basins be managed according to the Clean Water Act and our blueprints of 1972, or we can face fines. The purpose of these basins is really functional. We are making that more important than anything anyone thinks is beautiful. I might think red twig dogwood is great. You might think Kentucky bluegrass is great. Unfortunately, we have to adhere to the blueprint that was originally defined, and we need native plants and grasses growing in these basins. The good news is the functional basins and seeds like that require less maintenance than any type of formal lawn or golf course, and it will help to keep our homeowner HOA costs down. So that's it. If you have any questions, my email's at the bottom, and I'm also on the member website, reachcheryl@gmail.com. One thing I forgot to mention is there is a handout that will be available in the clubhouse on the table for a little while. And then someplace off the website will probably put under rules and regulations, the rules that are maintenance requirements, like after a storm of 2 inches, these basins will need to be inspected. And we'll actually have an inspection report that we need to fill out and document that the status of each basin, were the pipes clean, was there trash, is there sediment building up? And as we document those things, we are in fact showing the state and anyone who would come look at us afterwards that we are adhering to the requirements of our stormwater basin maintenance. The other side of this document that will be at the clubhouse is just kind of a summary of this talk. So that's it. Thanks for listening, and just reach out if you have questions.